Great. I'm in pre-production and preparing well.
Mel Gibson is starting to speak out more about the resurrection of the Christ being the sequel.
The resurrection of Christ is the most powerful moment in Christian history, yet Mel Gibson says it's the part we've never truly seen. According to him, the resurrection was not calm or gentle. It was terrifying, supernatural, and world-shaking. Something happened inside the tomb that films, paintings, and sermons have avoided for centuries. It was said that the supernatural responded in ways never shown on screen. This unseen moment, Gibson claims, reveals the true cost and power of Christ's victory over death. What really happened the instant Jesus rose? And why has this version of the resurrection been hidden for so long? Stay tuned as Mel Gibson reveals the resurrection in ways you have never seen. What we never see on screen. Everyone thinks they know the resurrection. A stone rolls away, light breaks through, a man in white linen walks out of the tomb, and the music swells. The camera pulls back, and the story ends. That's the version audiences have seen 100 times. Clean, safe, easy to wrap their minds around. But that's not the version that haunts Mel Gibson. That's not the story that makes his hands shake when he thinks about putting it on film. The real mystery isn't what happened after the tomb opened. It's what happened before anyone saw anything. Before Mary arrived at the garden. Before the guards ran away, terrified. Before the disciples heard the news and refused to believe it. There's a stretch of time between the cross and the empty tomb that cinema has barely touched. Most filmmakers skip right over it. Gibson understands why. It's dark territory. It's theological ground that makes studios nervous. It doesn't fit neatly into 3 acts, but that's exactly where the real earthquake happened. Not the one that split the rocks when Christ died. The other one, the one that shattered every assumption about what death could hold and what life could reclaim. Gibson has spent years studying this gap, reading the texts, the prophecies, the ancient creeds that mention it in passing like everyone already understood. Talking to scholars who treat it like a footnote, talking to priests who know it changes everything but struggle to explain how. Most people think the resurrection is about a body coming back to life. That's part of it, sure, but it's not the whole story, not even close. What happened in that tomb wasn't just reversal, it was invasion. It was a door being kicked open from the inside. It was the moment death stopped being the end of every human story. That's what Gibson wants to film. Not the safe version, not the version that makes audiences comfortable, the version that actually happened between that Friday afternoon and Sunday morning. The one where victory looks like violence. But to understand what happened in the tomb, you first have to understand what happened the moment Christ stopped breathing. Because that's when everything the world thought it knew about death started to crack apart. The silence after the cross. When Christ died, the world didn't move on, it reacted. The ground split open, the temple veil tore itself in half from top to bottom, rocks cracked apart like they'd been struck with hammers. The sky went dark in the middle of the afternoon. And it wasn't an eclipse. Everyone who was there felt it in their bones. The Romans felt it. Hardened soldiers who'd seen every kind of death suddenly looked terrified. One of them said out loud what everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to admit. This man really was who he claimed to be. And they'd just him. The priests felt it too.
Jesus died, an earthquake took place that was so powerful. From the most holiest place, the Holy of Holies, is ripped in half from top to bottom.
They were inside the temple when the veil ripped open. The thick curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from everyone else. The barrier that only the high priest could pass once a year. It tore like tissue paper, access being ripped open. The presence of God suddenly available to everyone. They tried to sew it back up, tried to restore the separation, but you can't undo that kind of damage. Once the door opens, it stays open. Death had occurred. Everyone saw it happen. The Romans made sure of it. They broke the legs of the men crucified next to him so they'd suffocate faster. But when they came to Christ, he was already gone. Just to be certain, they drove a spear into his side. Blood and water poured out. Medical proof. He wasn't unconscious. He was dead. But victory hadn't been announced yet. Nobody understood what had just happened. The disciples were hiding, the women were weeping, the religious leaders were relieved. Rome thought it had handled another problem. Everyone believed the movement had ended with the man who started it. They had no idea the real battle was just beginning. Gibson sees this moment as the hinge point. Everything before it was building toward the cross. Everything after it flows from what happened next. But this moment right here, this silence after death, this is where most films stop paying attention. They treat it like intermission, like nothing important happens between Friday night and Sunday morning. But something did happen. Something massive. Something that would make the crucifixion look like preparation instead of conclusion. Because while the world thought the tomb held a corpse, Christ was about to go somewhere no living person had ever returned from, and he wasn't going as a victim. The burial no one understands. As they took him down from the cross quietly, Joseph of Arimathea came forward. A wealthy man, a member of the council that had condemned Christ hours earlier, went to Pilate and asked for the body. A bold move. Pilate was surprised Christ had died so quickly. Crucifixion usually took days. He called the centurion to confirm it. Once confirmed, Pilate released the body. Nicodemus came too, another council member, another man who'd been afraid to speak up during the trial. He brought 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes, an enormous amount, the kind of burial treatment reserved for kings. They weren't burying a failed Messiah. They were burying someone they believed mattered. The tomb itself was new, carved out of rock, never used before, Joseph's own burial place. They carried the body inside, laid it on the stone bench. No ceremony, no time for proper mourning, just the essential acts. Wrap the body, place it in position, step back out. Then they rolled the stone across the entrance. Not a small rock, a massive circular stone that fit into a groove. It took multiple men to move it, and once it settled into place, it would take multiple men to move it back. That was the point. Tombs weren't just burial places. They were seals, final barriers between the dead and the living. But that wasn't enough for the religious leaders. They remembered Christ had said he'd rise on the third day. They didn't believe it would happen, but they couldn't risk his disciples stealing the body and claiming it did. So they went to Pilate with a request. Make the tomb secure, post guards, seal it officially. So they did. Roman soldiers stationed outside the tomb. Trained men who knew the penalty for falling asleep on duty was death. The stone wasn't just rolled into place. It was sealed with Rome's authority. A cord stretched across it, wax stamped with the official seal. Break that seal, and you're defying the empire. Everyone assumed the threat would come from outside. Nobody considered the possibility that the threat was already inside. That death itself had just let in something it couldn't contain. Because while guards watched the entrance and priests felt satisfied the story was finished, Christ's spirit had already left the tomb. And it was headed somewhere that would change everything humanity thought it knew about what happens after the last breath. The descent, the scene Hollywood avoids. Now, this is the part nobody films because it's not safe. While the body lay still in the tomb, wrapped in burial cloths and guarded by Roman soldiers, something else moved. Christ's spirit descended. Not in weakness, not in defeat, in authority.
Which is you're in another place. You're in another realm. You need to go to hell. You need to go to Sheol.
He went down into the realm of the dead. Not hell as cartoons imagine it with pitchforks and flames. Not some torture chamber underneath the earth. The actual place where human souls waited. The place every person who'd ever died had gone. The place locked shut since Adam took his last breath. Gibson sees it as the centerpiece of the entire resurrection story. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a takeover. For thousands of years, death had been the end. The final word. The locked door nobody could open from either side. Death thought it had won when it swallowed him on the cross. It had no idea it had just consumed something that would destroy it from the inside. Gibson has spent years trying to visualize this moment. How do you film something that happens in a realm nobody living has seen? How do you show spiritual reality with physical cameras? How do you capture the moment when death itself realizes it's been beaten? He keeps coming back to one image: light in darkness. Not gentle light, not comforting light, violent light. The kind that makes darkness retreat. The kind that breaks chains and throws open locked gates. The kind that announces itself before it arrives. Because this wasn't just about rescuing a few righteous souls from the past. This was about breaking death's grip on every human soul that would ever live. And death wasn't going to surrender that power without resistance. When death realized it lost. When Christ entered the realm of the dead, everything that had held humanity captive for thousands of years suddenly faced something it had never encountered before. Someone who had died but couldn't be held. Someone death had swallowed but couldn't digest. Someone who belonged there by experience but not by guilt. The righteous recognized him immediately. The presence they'd been promised. The deliverer they'd believed in without seeing. Moses knew. Abraham knew. David knew. Everyone who died trusting God's word suddenly understood that the word had arrived. In person. In power. Exactly as promised. Gibson pictures this as the most important confrontation in human history. Not the crucifixion. That was necessary, but it was preparation. This moment right here, in the realm nobody sees, this is where the actual victory happened. Where the ransom got paid. Where the prison doors got kicked open. Death had rules. Everyone who enters stays. No exceptions. No appeals, no way back. Those rules had held for every human being who'd ever lived. Kings and beggars, saints and sinners, prophets and fools. Death was the great equalizer. The final authority. The one power nothing could overturn until now. History reversed direction in that moment, not just for the people present in that realm, for everyone. Every human being who would ever die after this. Death stopped being the final word. It became a doorway, a transition, something Christ had already walked through and come out the other side. The grave didn't just open, it emptied. Not all at once, not chaotically, but systematically, deliberately. The way a conqueror goes through a defeated city and releases every prisoner. But victory in the realm of the dead meant nothing if it stayed there. The world above needed proof. The body in the tomb needed what the spirit had just accomplished. And that's where the real miracle began. Resurrection. Not an escape, a return. Somewhere between the realm of the dead and the sealed tomb in Jerusalem, spirit and flesh reconnected. Not the way it happens at birth. This was life forcing its way back into a body that had been tortured, killed, and left for dead. The body had been dead for parts of 3 days. Jewish counting included partial days, so Friday afternoon to Sunday morning qualified. But dead is dead. Blood had stopped flowing. Cells had stopped dividing. The biological processes that define life had completely ceased. And then they started again. The wounds sealed without erasing memory. The marks from the nails stayed in his hands and feet. The spear wound remained in his side, not because they couldn't fully heal, because they were proof, evidence that this was the same body that died, the same person who suffered, not a replacement, not an illusion, the actual man who'd been executed by Rome. The stone moved not to let him out. That's what people assume, that he needed the stone rolled away to escape. But nothing about the resurrection suggests limitation. The same body that would later walk through locked doors didn't need a stone moved to exit a tomb. The stone moved to show everyone else they were already too late, to reveal the empty space where a corpse should have been, to prove that something impossible had happened exactly where Rome and the religious leaders thought they'd sealed up the story forever. But Christ didn't emerge from that tomb to address armies or confront empires. His first appearance after resurrection would be to someone nobody expected, someone the world had already dismissed. Why he didn't appear to crowds. The most powerful moment in human history didn't get a stage. No announcement to Jerusalem, no confrontation with Pilate, no public appearance in the temple to prove the priests wrong. Christ rose from the dead, and the first person he showed himself to was a woman who came to the tomb expecting to anoint a corpse. Mary Magdalene arrived in the darkness before dawn. Grief drove her there, the kind that doesn't wait for sunlight or company. She needed to be near him, even if all that remained was a body wrapped in burial cloths. She found the stone already rolled away, the tomb empty, the burial cloths left behind like shed skin. She didn't think resurrection. She thought theft. Someone had taken him. She ran to tell Peter and John. They came running back with her, saw the empty tomb with their own eyes, the cloths lying there but the body gone. They looked at the evidence and went home confused. The tomb was empty, but that didn't mean he was alive. It just meant they didn't know where he was. Mary stayed. She stood outside the tomb weeping. Everyone else had left. She was alone with her grief and her questions. And that's when she saw him. She thought he was the gardener. A reasonable assumption. A man standing near a tomb at dawn. She asked him where they'd taken the body. Then he said her name, Mary. Then she knew. The way you recognize a voice that matters. She turned and saw him clearly. Not a gardener, not a stranger. The rabbi she'd followed. The man she'd watched die. Standing in front of her, breathing and whole. Gibson understands why Christ appeared to her first. Not because she deserved it more than the disciples. Because the resurrection spreads quietly at first. It doesn't announce itself to people looking for proof. It reveals itself to people looking for him. His mother came to the tomb later. And then he appeared to her too. The disciples were next. Frightened men locked behind doors because they thought the authorities would come for them next. They'd abandoned him at the arrest. Denied knowing him during the trial. Hidden while he died. He appeared into the room with them. The resurrection didn't spread because of crowds or spectacles. It spread because witnesses couldn't stay silent. And one witness in particular refused to believe until he could touch the wounds himself. The resurrection that never ended. Christ appeared to his followers over 40 days. Not once nor twice. Multiple times in different places to different people. He ate with them, talked with them, let them touch his scars, walked beside them on roads, appeared in locked rooms, showed up on beaches at dawn. Thomas demanded proof. He'd missed the first appearance, heard the others describe it, refused to believe based on their testimony alone. He wanted evidence his hands could verify. Unless I see the nail marks and put my finger where the nails were, I won't believe. A week later, Christ appeared again, spoke directly to Thomas. Put your finger here, see my hands, reach out and touch my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas touched the wounds and fell to his knees. My Lord and my God. No more questions, no more demands for proof. The evidence standing in front of him erased every doubt. After 40 days of appearances and teaching, 40 days of proving the resurrection wasn't temporary or fragile. Then, the final moment. He led them to a hillside outside Jerusalem, promised them power, told them to wait. Then he ascended, lifted up until clouds hid him from sight. Not death, not departure, transition. 10 days later, the real continuation began. Fire, breath, language breaking open. The Spirit he promised arriving with power. Frightened disciples suddenly bold. Hidden followers suddenly public. The resurrection that started in a tomb began spreading into streets and cities and nations. A chain reaction still moving, still unfolding, still transforming everyone it touches. Gibson sits with the script in his hands. Years of research, hundreds of conversations, thousands of hours imagining how to film what can't be fully captured on camera.
It took me about 8 years to write the script for the sequel, if you can call it that, The Resurrection of the Christ, which is like because it's a very complex and almost impossible to understand subject.
The resurrection isn't just a scene, it's the scene. Everything in human history either leads to it or flows from it. And cinema has barely scratched the surface. But that's not what keeps him up at night. What haunts him is the possibility of getting it wrong, of reducing the most important event in history to special effects and dramatic music, of making people think they've seen the resurrection when all they've seen is a movie. The truth is bigger than film, wilder than any script, more dangerous than any studio wants to acknowledge. Gibson knows he can't capture all of that, but he can try. He can push cinema into territory it's avoided. He can show audiences something they've never seen before. He can make them feel the weight of what happened in that tomb, even if he can't fully show it. The resurrection you've never seen. That's what he's chasing. Not the sanitized version, not the safe one. The version that changes everything it touches, the version still spreading. Still unfinished, still resurrection. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.